So today we are going to talk about one of the most important topics, which is co-founders and teams. Without them, you cannot build a company. And there are a lot of mistakes which founders do. So let's quickly get started. Mentors, if you could quickly introduce yourselves. And we did have another mentor, but he's great. He's been mentoring at FI for a long time, but he has an medical emergency with his family, so he was not able to join us. But I will request him to add office hours later on for you guys. All right, so let's get started. Monica, would you like to introduce us?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Monica Blazinski. I'm a PhD in material science. I'm a technical founder several times, as well as a former VC. So I've been on both sides of the coin. And I specialize in material science, specifically polymeric materials. I'm currently leading my own company, Green Shoot Materials, on sustainable packaging.
Thanks, Monica. Amit?
Hey everyone. I believe I've met a few of you already in the previous review checks and office hours. So I'm Amit Banot. I'm a corporate lawyer by profession. Most recently practiced in-house at a bank. I used to be a director at the Legal Tech chapter of the Founder Institute, and also used to be a venture partner at Loyal VC. Also a former founder of a venture-backed startup, and now have founded Runway 6 Ventures, which is a hybrid of a venture capital model and a banking product. That takes up half my time, and the other half I spend strategy and ops at a Y Combinator startup in the AI fintech space. That's my story.
Thanks, Amit. And the third mentor hasn't joined us yet, so I'll ping him and check in. In the meantime, who would want to go first? And then we have Mercedes also who's going to be presenting today. Amit, Monica, Mercedes. Okay, Monica.
I'm happy to go.
Okay, let's go for it.
So just one caveat. I had to switch computers. So my old deck that I made this morning got lost. So I made an ugly one in the last 15 minutes. So please excuse the design. But I will share my screen and let me know when you see it.
No presentation yet. Yes, you can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so co-founders and team. So in a 2018 CB Insights study, they did a post-mortem of startup failures, which I'm sure many of you have heard about already, across hundreds of failed startups. And if you look at the top 12 reasons, several of them relate to co-founder and team issues. And given the stage of company that most of you are probably at, arguably team is the most important factor to predict startup success, because so many things will change along the way, but in many cases, the team is the only constant. And the reality is that it's tough to find the perfect co-founder or team. You're doing a risky startup, and most of the people you want to recruit would likely have high opportunity cost. So what do you do? What I do is, I look out for potential red flags, for potential green flags, and then make an informed decision based on the circumstances at the time. And if it turns out having a bad outcome, that's okay because you adapt and you keep moving forward. And so today, I'm going to highlight potential flags that I've experienced or I've seen other founders experience as it relates to co-founders and team. And I use the word potential flags because they were only red or green in the context of those specific experiences that I'm talking about. So this isn't a blanket statement, that these are good or bad, because as a founder, you need to be resourceful and do the best you can in your situation. And in my view, there's no definitive right or wrong answers, right? So with that caveat, here are some potential red flags, potential green flags, and then some tips on what to do when a green becomes a red. So some flags I've seen, ornamental team members, right? So try not to engage team members just because you think they'll look impressive in your deck and you think the optics will help with fundraising. I've seen this a lot, and I've seen sometimes founders give equity to high profile individuals or for specific roles just to fill gaps. But realistically, if your startup is so low on that person's priority list, you're probably not going to get that much value out of the relationship. And many savvy investors know that. I've had founders say to me that, hey, some of these advisors, are on vesting schedules, so I can just get rid of them if they don't do what they say they're going to do. But in reality, sometimes it's really hard to trigger that, right? Because you burn a relationship, right? So I've seen scenarios where people have just given up equity for ornamental purposes, unfortunately. Another one is part-time co-founders. And this is a mixed one, because I've seen scenarios where, definitely many scenarios where sometimes a founder will be full-time and another one will be part-time. And then, they'll wait till a milestone is hit and then they will join full-time. Unfortunately, a lot of the times that milestone takes a lot longer than you anticipate and resentment can build, right? And unless there's a part-time co-founder, providing a specific skill set that you really need, right? Because some people on a part-time basis can do that, right? If they can't, it's sometimes a time suck to keep them in the loop, right? Because as a founder, you're in the weeds and so much is changing, right? And spending time just to keep someone informed, right? It's hard for them to provide the type of value that a co-founder needs to provide. So some other flags I see, no trial period, right? So you don't need to go straight to co-founder or core team member or give equity at day one. It's okay to date before marrying, right? If you find a suitable co-founder, you're going to engage them as an independent contractor first, right? And be very clear that there are like 30, 60, or 90-day deliverables or milestones as part of the trial, right? So you can both feel each other out, right? I've seen people do that and just like add that as a addendum in their independent contractor agreement. So that's usually a good way to start. Another one, and this one's a bit important to me, given my background as a lawyer, but no legal docs, right? So many times I'll see founders punt this until they know the business is real, right? And I get that, right? Or until there's like a financing coming up. Now, the issue is that if there's unresolved questions or concerns, right, the last thing you want to do is settle that when there's more at risk, right? Because there are some things that are very standard, in like a startup legal package that could be viewed as aggressive to someone who's not familiar with the space, right? Like, for example, things like vesting schedules or IP assignments, which are pretty standard, but I've seen a scenario where a co-founder will hire like a lawyer, like a local lawyer who has no familiarity with startup world, and they would raise all of these issues, and all of a sudden you have this messy negotiation, right before you're supposed to be doing something good, right? So it's best to crystallize your relationship as early as possible. And I get you don't want to spend money for that. And there are many firms that will actually give you packages where you don't have to pay until a financing. So, crossing your T's and dotting your I's when things are good is the best way to build a cohesive relationship, in my view. Another flag, no vesting schedules, right? So ideally, every founder has a vesting schedule, for their shares or options. It's a long-term game, right? You need people who are committed for that long term. Traditionally, you used to see 4 years, but I've seen people advocate now for longer because, you're around for potentially 7 to 10 years, right? And strategically, it's actually much easier to get the rest of your team to agree to these types of terms if you yourself can say, hey, me as the founder or CEO have signed the exact same thing, right? In practice, like the reality is the risk profile is a bit different, right? Because you as founders will likely have majority of control of the company until seed or later, right? So your exposure is less, but it's good to lead by example, in my view, right? And be very transparent about it. Now for some potential green flags, of course, the opposite of all the red flags that I just said. So those are all kind of good things to look for. But the most important thing that I would look for is emotional investment in your business, right? It's a grind, right? And you need someone who's equally obsessed to solve the problem you want to solve, right? And that's hard to determine, at the beginning, right? But there are things that you can look for, right? Like having genuine interest in the market, right? So, like having someone who actually cares about following the right newsletters, reading the right people on Twitter, going to the right conferences, right? It's for your business, right? You think about it in the shower, you think about it when you're driving, you think about it all the time, right? And you can't just transplant that into someone else, but that someone else kind of needs to have that eventually, right? So if they're kind of already on the way, right, that's a good indicator. Uh, of course, complementary skill set, right? That's something that's helpful. And lastly, what I found is finding a team and co-founders where you can have some healthy friction, right? And what I mean by that is that you should be able to comfortably debate things, right? Startup world is very different than like corporate or professional world, where many times someone can clearly know the right answer and someone doesn't, right? In this world, like everyone's probably going to be wrong most of the time, right? So you need to be able to debate, right, and find the right way together. And finally, what happens, when things go bad? And again, apologies for how ugly this deck is, right? So when flags go from green to red, co-founder fallouts happen all the time, right? But you always want to try to handle it in a commercial way, right? So what I mean by that is that it doesn't matter what the legal documents say, right? If someone wants to go nuclear, right, they can create a mess, right? And your startup life is already so chaotic, right? So that's the last thing you want to do is be in a situation where there's a co-founder departure, right? And it's okay to find out fast that you're not a good fit and it's better to do it right away, but you want to do it in an amicable way, right? And one approach that I've seen kind of work in the past is to shift the co-founder from like a driver to a passenger, right? Because the and what I mean by that is that, a common follow could be something like, hey, co-founder has been doing this for a while without a salary, and now I need to go back to my day job to pay the bills, right? And that's reasonable, right? So a conversation could be had with something like, hey, sure, you can go back, but maintain an advisor role maybe, right? And potentially revisit that in the future, right? But ideally, the cap table should reflect our advisor role as well, right? So, there can be share transfers, there can be share surrenders, there are some tax implications, to think about there. But these types of recaps, like I've seen happen, pretty regularly in founder departures, right? The things that you want to avoid though is any future liabilities, right? You don't want a founder to kind of say, hey, um, I am cool to give my shares and leave, but when you raise capital, I want to pay out, right? Because future investors don't want to see debt equity in the cap table and their capital going towards previous liabilities, right? And the other thing that I've seen is future investors don't want to see any excessive control from the previous founder, right? So there might be hardwired board seats in a shareholder agreement, right? So those you'd have to get rid of, or like veto rights on certain things. Yeah, and so those are my potential green flags, potential red flags, things to do when things go bad. Again, the caveat is these are just situations that I've seen, and every situation is different. So I'm sure you can be very successful in finding, good co-founders, even if you have some of these flags that I've shown. And I'm having office hours, so feel free to book some time if you want to chat further about any of these things or ask questions in the Q&A. That's it for me.
Thanks a lot, Amit. Monica, you want to go next?
Sure thing. Oh, looks like I'm gonna have to restart really quick and come back so I can share.
Oh,
So-
no worries. I see Evelyn in here. Hi, Evelyn. And maybe by the time you come back, he can get us started.
Sounds good.
Hey, Sana, hey everybody. I said earlier that I'll have to be calling from my car because I'm in Austin, it's 8 after 8, and there is all sorts of holiday family events, and there was one that I had to attend, didn't have enough time to get home. So sorry for that. Hopefully you can hear and see me. How is the connection? I don't want to torture everybody.
Connections? Good.
Okay. Would you be able to share the slides that I sent earlier?
Yes. I'll
Appreciate
give.
that.
Okay.
Thank you. So I've met with some of you in office hours, but I'll give you a quick background. Most of my career has been around open source projects, with a few of them getting enough traction to commercialize. And I've had a couple of exits back, uh, some years ago to Red Hat and now IBM. Later on, I worked on more open source related companies in telecom, web infrastructure. And for the last few years, I've been mostly focusing on spending time with founders in the AFI network, and sometimes mentor, sometimes being an angel investor, and occasionally work on other projects. But yeah, I would say most of my focus is FI teams. So on the topic for tonight, thanks for the opportunity. I'll share just based on my own experience. Obviously, every mentor brings their own background, which is what's great about the FI network. You get to hear a lot of people, and some of them will connect better to your individual situation. So you get to decide whose advice to pick or not. Let's go to the next slide, please. So if there is one thing that I would like you to take away from this, is that it's, in my experience, I've hired hundreds of people throughout my companies, and either bigger companies that I've worked for after post acquisition. The one thing that absolutely it has become a hard rule for me is that do whatever it takes, take as long as it takes to bring in A+ players. I don't know what's about the human psychology, but you compromise on that, it's a slippery slope and it goes downhill gradually, sometimes slow, sometimes fast. Let's go to the next slide, please. So, and that kind of splits in two different areas of discussion. When it comes to co-founders, I heard this earlier in the previous presentation, and I believe that is the case. Co-founders need to be generalists. There is absolutely no way to know what tomorrow is going to bring. It tends to be a very lonely job because nobody is going to make the decisions for you. How to run the company, ultimately, you need to make those super hard decisions. And even though you may be building a product for whatever market, the number of issues that come up from all directions is insane. It's very often has nothing to do with your product, with your skills, with your market. It's all sorts of, legal or hiring or cultural, or somebody's, you hired somebody in a vacation in a place that has very important vacation coming up, and that's happens to be at the time of a release. All kinds of issues keep coming up. So co-founders, I found, they need to have the mindset of general problem solving. No matter what comes across, you got to be able to be comfortable with the thought of, okay, yet another challenge. I know nothing about this, and I'll see it through. Got to figure out a way, and we'll solve it. The reason why I put in this icon of half heart, half brain is because on the next slide or two, I want to briefly touch on how usually, in my experience, startups end up working out. Next slide, please. So the one thing, is it possible to bring it in presentation mode? To blow it up so I can see the.
Let me zoom in a little bit.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Okay, so the main thing from this slide that I'd like to kind of share and hopefully take away is that very often we tend to socialize what we're about to build with friends, family, coworkers, people that are generally friendly and are share a hobby, share something that we have touch points with. But that's usually nothing close to what you usually want in a startup, right? Is that a person that will be a generalist and is ready to take on any sort of fight any sort of problem, and take on any kind of fight that they'll need to take every day. I apologize if it's offensive about the emotional support pet situation, but I've seen this too many times where people bring on board experts that they know from their backgrounds, or friends that know something about marketing or something about sales, or they've had success in real estate, or whatever random reason, and they just have good chemistry, and they are kind of supportive. They'll always be there for you and pat you on the back and tell you to keep going. But I don't think that's what a founder needs as a co-founder, right? Specifically co-founder. You need somebody who's a fighter. It's a war situation, absolutely no doubt, in my experience. There is very, very, very little room for nice and cozy and fluffy conversations and experiences for the first n number of years. Next slide, please. So again, take whatever time it takes you, whatever search process you're comfortable with, and however far you need to reach, but preemptively solve the issues that the previous presentation brought up towards the end. Like, there are so many ways things can go wrong and will go wrong, that dealing with a divorce type situation is not at all fun. It can destroy and does destroy companies. When co-founders split up, the teams get split up. Early in the day, everything is very fragile. So because you'll be spending 80, 100 hours or more a week, this is effectively your life. The reality is you get no life while you're running this thing, and for some years until it gets off the ground. So it's your marriage, it's your everything. And think about this relationship with your co-founder as somebody that will be there through thick and thin. There's going to be a lot of problems, and you want them to solve them with you to fight with you and not really just be there to comfort you, because there is no point of feeling comfortable that another problem arrives unless you actually attack it and solve it. That's the only thing that matters. Will you solve it or will you give up? So many reasons every day to quit, for sure. Just zooming here to make sure I'm not missing anything that I wanted to bring up. Yeah, I found it personally that it's much better to work with somebody who will call out when you're delusional or when you're kind of talking about stuff that sounds right, but it's just the wrong thing to think about or do, and be fine dealing with those sort of call outs and kind of constructively go past the issue, then having a nice, polite discussion every time. That I don't think is very helpful. And again, too many people would be comfortable, especially in bigger companies. So many conversations are around, oh yeah, this is hard. We should delay. We should postpone until next quarter. That thing is not in the budget. It's not in the plan. Let's do it later. No big deal. The company will be fine with or without it. That is absolutely the wrong attitude in a startup. When something hits you, you gotta have the attitude to see it through and solved, because nobody else will. And many of these things in the early days are do or die. They will take down the company if they're not addressed, because you don't have the financial cushion, enough cash in the bank, runway. You don't have the support of a large company to absorb mistakes and to ignore problems, postpone them for later. That just doesn't exist in the early bootstrapping days. Where to look? I don't know why FI is not doing good enough job of promoting folks in the network to work together, because almost every office hour, maybe every other office hour, I get a question: where should I look for a co-founder? And the very obvious, answer to me is like, in the FI cohorts, people that you talk to that survive the pretty harsh FI syllabus and program, which is that way for a reason, they are very well maybe the people that you want to work with. And as we all know, oftentimes the first idea you go into FI with, but at the end of the program, it's changed 3-4 times. And it's likely that you may like one of your peers' idea better than yours. And because you're both generalists, because you're both trying to build something, not afraid to bootstrap, to fight, maybe you should actually think about partnering up instead of going out in the wild and starting the process from scratch. And by all means, take advantage of your directors, mentors in the networks who have been in this for a while, who have built, failed, tried, and may refer you to somebody who's in another cohort or recently graduated who might be a good fit. This happens all the time. I make these introductions quite often. So take advantage of that. FI is an awesome global network of talented people. Next slide, please. Okay, so switching to the next area. From my perspective, team is a very, very different type of hiring than co-founders. So when you start bringing more people on the team, very, very often in the early days, because you don't know what's next, because you're trying to figure out so many things, product, market fit, whatnot, it is super easy to get people that are smart, opinionated, and pulling in different directions. It's one thing to have a constructive discussion and agree or disagree, but commit to one direction. And it's a very different situation where you end up with strongly opinionated people that disagree and do not commit or independently pull in different directions. That is bad. So more than one or two generalists gets to be really chaotic. Normally, you in the co-founding team, you need somebody who is kind of super technical, can build anything, can figure out any sort of rational problem and build a product around it, and then somebody who can close deals, who has tremendously great soft skills and can go close deals. Market, sell, make things happen, make people look at your product. Obviously, very rarely there is two in one. Those are some exceptional founders that exist like that, but more often than not, it's a combination, right? But when it comes to the team, probably not a great idea to have journalists and people that are going to also add more pull in different directions. At the time of first of all, next slide, please. First of all, do you think you're ready to expand the team? Like I had an office hour today with a founder who is single founders at this point looking for a co-founder and already brought in sort of part-time advisors with strong, successful backgrounds and calling them a team. That's very dangerous because none of these folks, first of all, feels the exact same incentive and pain to see the company succeed and pain if it fails. But also they don't think and they don't see all the aspects that you as a founder. And if you're gonna bring people that are specializing in a particular area, you better be sure that you know what to ask them. You know how to set a direction. If you're not sure what exactly your product looks like and what are its strong selling points, if you don't have enough validation, probably hold back on a marketing specialist or VP of marketing, whatever you want to call it, because they will want from you a direction. And if you haven't figured that out, at least the foundationals of it, it'll get chaotic. They'll start pulling in whatever direction they feel is right based on their background. And because they're not a co-founder, they're not nearly as incentivized and not as aware of everything that's happening. And before you know it, you'll have a salesperson selling one thing, the marketing person marketing another thing. And then if you hire a separate developer outside of your co-founder to be building things without having clarity among the co-founders what exactly we want to get built, then they'll build whatever they think is right. And then what you end up is like the picture in the team slides, everybody pulling in a random direction. So do not rush expanding the team, is my advice, until you're ready to assign specific tasks to these specialists. Now, when you're ready, and because it's very early team, chaos still remains. Everything is uncertain still in the first couple of years. So do not get very impressed by somebody who's worked maybe for Google for 10 years with a team of 20 people or 200 people, whatever, and you throw them in a startup. After several years of working in an environment with a ton of support, corporate support, it's very hard to switch over and be comfortable with executing with minimum direction. So be super careful with that. I'd like to kind of think about more special forces that are few, each one having very strong skills and able to do a ton of other things in addition as needed without relying on massive support around them. So that tends to be something important for the early team. Again, people with strong startup mentality, they can thrive in the chaos, but also need very strong direction from you. What exactly do you want them to do, so they don't go do something random, and then it takes a lot more energy to bring everybody back together towards a North Star. So I think that's, let's see.
That looks like your last slide.
Okay, yeah, now let me see. Yeah, just wanted to maybe reiterate that people that come from big companies with a lot of success tend to be much faster to come up with a reason why something will not work, instead of just figuring out how to get it to work. Okay, if that's last slide, then that's it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'll stick around for questions.
Evelyn, do you want to go ahead and respond to questions right now since you're in the automobile?
Yeah, absolutely. Could you help me with the questions? Which ones?
Sure. Just a second. Specific to you, if you had to pick a winner based off of the one qualifier, team, product, or traction, which one would you prioritize to the investor?
Traction, for sure. That's the
Traction
bottom
is
line. From my experience, that's the bottom line. Investors want to know, have you actually achieved something, or are you going to talk to me and waste my time? If you start by, this is what we achieved, and let me tell you how and why, you don't need to tell them how and why. They'll ask you, how did you possibly achieve this super hard thing? Almost no startups are able to get traction. How did you get traction? But most of us cannot talk about traction in the early days. But if you do have traction, definitely, lead with that.
Anybody else? I think it was pretty self-explanatory. I love the emotional pets. You're gonna have to steal that. That's just like fantastic.
Hopefully didn't hurt anybody's feelings, but I think FI is there to help people, not to support pets. Make them feel cozy. So
yeah,
get uncomfortable, get it done. Thank you.
So I pulled up an old presentation from the days in which we called it hiring and onboarding. And I think there's just quite a few things that we don't think about when we're forming a company, as well as when we're talking to clients. As a director or CEO, you have legal and moral obligations just out of the gate. And these are different statutory duties that come with owning a company that is very different than just being an employee. So there's a reason that Elizabeth Holmes is in jail, right? Essentially, she was trying to fake it till she made it, but it was a lot of fraud that was taking place, and overselling, and complete misrepresentation about what she was doing. So I hope that you guys understand kind of the difference. And then also understand, with legal obligations, certain states have certain laws. I don't think anybody in this cohort is like touching gambling or crypto. Actually, that's not totally true. Crypto is being touched, but we're forming more laws around that. So I think that'll be easy to sort out in the future. But when it comes to like gambling, like one of my mentors couldn't come back to the US for about 10 years because the United States government wanted him, because his startup essentially like allowed for gambling to happen in states that didn't allow gambling, and he didn't block IP addresses and things of that nature. So it was a big problem. Your co-founders and staff, you don't want to over-promise to them, and always hire them with lots of clarity. So when I think back to like when I worked for like small startups or even big companies, the best roles that I landed were the ones that had the most clarity like upfront. And if you don't have a lot of clarity right now, like I get that, you need to tell people that they have to wear a lot of hats and give them like examples of like day-to-day operations, sales, marketing, whatever the case is. Let them know that they're gonna have to like get in, get dirty, and it's not gonna be such a straightforward job. So we touched a little bit on this, but make sure you hire slow and fire fast. And the reason why is because you don't have a lot of touch points to mess up on. Also, forcing someone who is something they are not isn't sustainable, nor is it really humane. So I'm sure that you've worked along people that you know they just don't have what it takes to like change. They're very repetitive people. If you can't find what you're looking for, just really don't hire for it, because you're just ultimately going to be disappointed. Fire humanely, just rip off the Band-Aid. You don't need to like spend a ton of time and justify when someone leaves the company. Certain states require you to fill out paperwork, but honestly, like once you start going down that path, it's pretty brutal. I just recommend letting them go under the at-will employment. Don't even like tell them why, but that's just me. And get rid of drama llamas, right? You know who it is, like probably within the cohort, within your working group, who is just filled with like drama. Don't hire like that type of person. You don't need it in your company. It's going to create problems. And there's a story like way back when Kinko's was getting started. And Kinko's isn't really around anymore. They were bought by FedEx, but if some of you remember, there was like Kinko's print shops, which are now the FedEx print shops. But the guy who started that, I think, hired his brother-in-law, and the brother-in-law was notorious for stealing from the company. And basically, it just eroded the employees like mentally, right? Like it just became a huge problem. And the reason the guy wouldn't fire him was because he was family. And the reality is he was just creating drama. He was like another drama llama. So again, just make sure you get rid of those people. Don't hire parents. Don't hire anyone that you would be afraid to fire. And if you're afraid to fire them, then you really should think about like what you're doing in the very beginning. So who do you need? At the start, there's different people that you can outsource, and there's different people you can hire. I'm not going to go through like all of these, but a lot of the outsourced people, you can find them on is it Elance or Fiverr, things like that. You can probably find them off Craigslist, other type of sites. And then people that you probably want to hire fall into the hire category. I'd really work on sales and engineering because there's only like two things that matter. You sell more, and the product actually works. So whatever you're doing, just keep it in mind. I also wouldn't get too uppity about titles, like very early on. You really should question somebody when they're like, oh, I need to be like the VP of finance or the VP of like whatever. Today I actually came across a situation where in one of my companies, a candidate who was being hired for finance pushed back. And it was because they wanted to be called VP of finance, but in that company, there are no VPs, right? And we're like, it just has to be head of finance. And the other thing too is like sometimes people get a little bit persnickety at titles, and you should question that because it's going to be a good indication as far as like what their personality is like, as far as being a prima donna. You might want to consider fractional hires. So when you have money and you're like, hey, I have $100,000 to spend on a headcount, or I have $60,000 to spend on a headcount, but I need more than one headcount. A company that I work with quite a bit is called Press Collective. And they basically custom tailor packages for your companies. And it's actually quite great, right? So if you are at a point in time in the first like couple of months, you need someone for branding, design, storytelling, they will put someone at more hours on that particular piece. And as that project is wrapping up, they might give you like a sales and marketing person and another resource from like 3 different areas for that one price. And the reason they can do that is because they have like a fractional staffing firm to help startups. So like I said, I am involved with it, but it works great, right? Like if I could have done this with like my startup, things would have gone swimmingly well, quite frankly. So who do you not need? In the beginning, human resources, right? Like some of you, particularly if you're from Europe, like we have this idea that we need a lot of human resources people, admins, executive assistants. That's not necessarily true. If you're gonna have an executive assistant, go hire one in the Philippines to help you in the short term. I even have a couple of names and numbers for like $3 to $4 an hour if you're interested. You don't need to hire travel agencies and like all these like frills. You just don't need it, right? So, but in the end, you know, you might want to like start looking at kitchen staff and cleaning staff and how to get rid of dead weight employees. And the reason I have like in the beginning and the end is like in the beginning you're broke, in the end you probably have like a lot of money. And then you see like startups do like crazy stuff, like getting kitchens, having staff, and tons of cleaning staff. There's things that you can do to keep those costs down. You may not even really need a building at this point in time. You know, the pandemic taught us a lot. So how do we hire? The question is can you make a proper hiring decision? And kind of, you know, what a lot of people have talked about tonight is like you tend to hire people that are like you. That is not what you want to do, right? So if you're an engineer, you're probably not going to be good at hiring, marketing, and sales. It is okay to go to your advisors and have them do the hiring for you. And I've absolutely done that for like FI companies to just give a better indication if that's like the right person for the right job. You also have to question if you're really a good judge of character. Not everyone is. So if you have those red flags in your relationships or those red flags within your life, within your friendships, you might want to rethink about how good your judgment is. Chances are it's not that great if you're not a good judge of character. So, and if you don't know if you're a good judge of character, go ask your friends. You know, hopefully they'll tell you the truth. So the other thing too, I recommend is be like very explicit about like what absolutely you need to get done. So set those expectations. Like what will the role accomplish? Accomplish is like the key term. Are there numbers or metrics associated? There should be numbers and metrics and KPIs associated with everything. Do you have a timeline? So your timeline needs to hear with kind of what's on your balance sheet and your accounting and how much money you have before you like run out. Personality decisions and considerations, like not all of us are blessed with like fantastic personalities. You know, I had 2 founders like years ago that were identical twins that were both like Asperger's, but they were kind of assholes to begin with. And, you know, I told them flat out, like, hey, you're really brilliant. You're both like tech oriented, but you make people feel really uncomfortable because you have really rude jokes. And so the best thing that you can do is go hire someone and you guys get stuck in the back office where no one sees you. And you know what? That's exactly what they did. They knew I was right. Their company has grown, but they were not like the people that you wanted up on stage. So people that you want up on stage tend to be pretty adept to networking crowds. They understand that, you know, they're the one that everyone is looking at. They're the marketer. So keep that in mind, right? That who you hire and what kind of personality considerations that you make really will like form your company. And it's also going to create drama llamas or people who are unmotivated, whatever the case is. I always recommend hire the best person that you can. You know, we are in an interesting time period where, you know, the Bay Area is getting let go of quite routinely. And the layoffs are going to continue. And so there's probably a lot of people that might want to join your startup, or might have the experience that you need, and they're willing to like put in the grit and the hours and to be paid a low amount. So just make sure that like when you go after employees that you pay them, particularly if they come out of California. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt, because there's nothing like California employment taxes that the state of California wants. They track them heavily. So travel, you need to make sure that people who are prima donnas probably don't join your team in the early beginning stages, because they're going to want like really expensive hotels versus like Motel 6. They're going to demand like huge payments for dinner, drinks, things like that nature. My suggestion is go find a demographic that doesn't drink and doesn't have heavy expectations and works really hard. You can do it. So flexibility in the role, educational components. You might be able to find some like really good people at Stanford that are students, they're working on their MBA or some PhD, and get them for a lower price than you would someone who is free and clear. So onboarding, now that you have an employee, what is next? Make sure that you create a warm atmosphere with guidance. What do they need to know about your company to succeed? They should always know the goals, right? Your goals should be their goals and the company goals. Like it's all in one general direction. Assign a project day one. I don't believe in like slow integration. Assign the project day one and figure out if they know their mission. Grade them on their performance. And then if they have budgets, let them know what it is, what they're working with. In some cases, particularly for like marketing and things like that, you want guerrilla marketers. So you should ask them like how they would guerrilla market in the interview, like whatever you're doing. I would always set up a new hire checklist, a compliance forms checklist, and evaluate the onboarding process all the time. The reason I suggest like new hire checklists is it's easier to forget stuff, right? There's laws associated with hiring people and timelines that you have to do, like according to the state. You guys might not know that. Go ask ChatGPT, I'm sure it'll help you. And that is about it. Any questions?
Mercedes, we have another presentation.
Oh, sure.
So let's do that and then questions. So Monica.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about Monica.
All right, let me see if it works now.
And Evelyn, I just want to let you know we really appreciate your time and you joined us from the car and you kind of stepped out. We will break out into breakout rooms. I'm not too sure whether doing that on your phone would be comfortable. So if you need to drop off and join the family again, please feel free to do so, okay? Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. I have office hours open. If anybody wants to jump in, welcome to. Thanks, everybody, and happy holidays.
Thanks. All right, Monica, take it away.
All right, thanks. All right, so this is a kind of series of pieces of advice that I've put together for you based upon my own experiences, things I wish I'd known years earlier before going down paths. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've lived through some of them. I've seen them. And so a lot of this, as a technical founder, as a scientist, I am drawn towards numbers and figures and facts, and realizing that sometimes that wasn't enough to hold a team together, to hold co-founders together. And these are things I wish I'd known that were ultimately detrimental to a startup before we even got off the ground. So these are things, pieces of advice kind of based upon my own experience. I think Emmett actually provided some of these initial numbers that I'm going to provide just to kind of reiterate just how critically important it is to find the right team, to find the right co-founders and have that fit. One metric was 23% of startups fail due to team issues. I've seen variations in that figure, ranging anywhere from 18 to even 30. I've seen ones that actually show that team issues are above financial issues. I don't know, that's very startup dependent, but it shows you how critical it is, and how critical a team is to the success of a startup. And this is critical to outside investors as well. Investors are looking at you, they're looking at your team, and they're looking at how well you work together, how well you mesh together, and ultimately whether that is going to lead to success. So they're watching very, very closely. And so how you represent as a team, how you present yourself as a team is going to be very much how investors feel they can trust you ultimately. So really finding the right team and co-founders can literally be the difference between thriving and failure. So one piece of advice I received early on that has stuck with me for years and years now is that when you look for a co-founder, you want somebody that you feel like you can always talk to. And I remember him saying, imagine it's Saturday night. Your startup has been going for a few months now. You get a call at 11 o'clock at night and it's your co-founder. So it can't be good. Whatever it is, if they're calling you, it can't be good. And when you look at that phone as it's ringing, the one thing you should feel is this excitement to talk to them. Not necessarily about what they're about to say. It could be devastating, but the fact that you want to talk to them. It's late at night. You're probably ready for bed. You're exhausted. But you want to talk to them. If you feel like dread and you just want to hang up the phone, that is a red flag. You should always be trusting and want to talk to your co-founder at all times, day or night. This journey that you're on is going to be years. You're in it, I think some of these numbers have been put out already, 80, 100 hours a week. You're there sometimes more than with family. So this cannot be somebody that you're dreading to talk to, regardless of how hard those conversations actually are. This is something I didn't really understand until I personally experienced it when we were going through technical issues and realizing that we just weren't able to communicate. This is a critical piece that I wish I had known. And truth and trust, that is the absolute cornerstone. Can you trust your co-founder? Can you trust them with the hard facts that may come, you may face, being able to pivot and being able to trust them with decisions and challenges that may come about. Communication is absolutely much more important sometimes than even having a co-founder who hits all the boxes technically. A lot of times if you have a co-founder who hits 90%, but is absolutely willing to communicate and make up the rest, I would take that any day over somebody who has all the technical skills, but you just can't communicate with. It's much harder to have those skills, those soft skills, than trying to come up and learn facts. Sometimes that's near impossible. Hiding bad news is never, it's never going to get better. And so from day one, you have to be able to have healthy, difficult conversations with your co-founders and be able to speak openly, really. The more of these conversations you have and the more that you can actually talk to them without getting into shouting matches, without fear of repercussion as well, that is going to be critical. Especially as in this environment where all of a sudden you have financial or technical issues compounding all at once, you have to be able to trust each other and know that you're going to be able to come out the other end and keep those lines of communication open. It's absolutely one thing that can sink a company your startup very easily when it's at its most, when you're feeling least safe, really. If your team is not cohesive as well, it's going to show very, very quickly to investors. Investors will feel you out for if you have a good product. They obviously want to know, all the technicals, all the financials, but they're going to be looking as well as how you perform as a team. And whether or not you are cohesive. And that will come out very easily if, for example, during pitch sessions, and I've seen this myself, where you have co-founders squabbling over details. or they're talking over each other, or they're contradicting each other. It is a red flag that will send a very, very clear signal to investors, and they will not feel like they can trust you. A cohesive team is what an investor wants to see. It builds trust, and that goes both ways. And so during early pitches, a lot of the advice I wish I would have known was see how you present as a team to other people. If you're having trouble, even if you're, internally just fine, but you're not presenting that externally, then just have maybe one person present. If you're not able to present that cohesiveness as easily during like a pitch session, sometimes that just happens because of nerves and it doesn't fully show. But that's where it sometimes is really important to make sure that that does portray, because investors are very much looking at you, your team, your co-founders, and how well you mesh together. And really set expectations early on. You're going to be wearing a lot of hats. Your co-founders will be wearing a lot of hats. You are generalists, but set those expectations early so that there is no resentment at the end. This can build up almost silently over time. So constantly check in. It's something that I wish I would have done. I wish something my co-founder would have done. We weren't checking in on each other. We were constantly into the specifics of building out our first product, not realizing that, everything else was crumbling because we weren't paying attention to anything else. And so make sure that you have that shared vision, make sure that you're constantly checking in on each other, and keep that frequent communication lines open. There's a certain list, certain questions I wish I would have asked myself. And I created this list based upon what, like when I go back, and I wish I would have known if I could, go back and tell myself, look out for this, or know this a little bit ahead of time. It'll save you a lot of heartache. It'll save you a lot of money, and a lot of time. Number one thing, do I enjoy talking to this person? I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's certain ones that really stand out because everything else kind of falls in line. Like just because your co-founder doesn't have 100% of the knowledge that is needed, but they fit everything else in terms of you're able to communicate, you can fill in the rest. You can learn, and you're going to be learning. Nobody knows everything. There is no unicorn co-founder. There's no perfect. None of us are. But meeting some of these and being able to kind of build and grow together is going to be really, really important. And somebody that is going to challenge you, and you can challenge them in a really respectful and healthy way. You don't know everything. None of us ever will. Your co-founder won't know everything. But it's kind of assumptions that we have as we start to build out our companies, that the market is, X, Y, Z. My product's going to look like this in next year. A lot of those are assumptions, and a lot of those are going to be challenged as you build it out, as you actually enter the market, as you get your first product. And so having a co-founder that is able to really challenge you and be able to really take that feedback honestly is really, really critical. You do not need yes people around you. That is a really quick path to getting something that may fail ultimately if you're not constantly challenged. Getting that feedback in a healthy way is really, really important. One thing that is another piece of advice that an investor actually gave to me is, would you want to spend 10 hours in the car with this person? One of the best things I did was spend a weekend with my co-founder and learn how they think and how they work, and go through all of that. Because sometimes you may have co-founders that you're virtual. You don't spend every single day in an office or next to them. And so some of these, they're oversights sometimes. You don't realize it until it's too late. Spend that time, do the groundwork, get to know them really, and really try to understand them before you actually commit. It's really, really important. And make sure that they are challenging you and they feel that they can challenge you. And that goes, of course, both ways. Ultimately, conflict will be inevitable. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Disagreements aren't necessarily a bad thing. They are not to be avoided at all, ever. These things always need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved quickly, because time is of the essence. You're building something, you are very vulnerable, especially during the first few years. And so you need to be able to resolve these things quickly so that you can get to the real work. And because there's just so much work that has to be done and has to be addressed. So be able, some things that we like examples of seeing how to communicate and how to actually overcome some of these like differences in communications or sometimes conflict resolution was understanding some are like brain patterns. There's a whole bunch of these that I've seen mentors and advisors do, and even employers have had do, of these like assessments of how do you think, how do you resolve conflict. Knowing how you work and knowing how your co-founder works can go a long way in actually being able to communicate, and I recommend those highly. Of course, it's not just you and your co-founder, hopefully. Hopefully your team will build and build exponentially. And so building the right team and knowing how everybody fits is also critical. And that's why some of these assessments are really, really important. Who is a visionary? Who is more of a dreamer versus a doer? And knowing where your skill set is. This is where it's sometimes really hard to like look at ourselves honestly and be like, you know, I'm missing some of these skill sets. I'm missing some of these soft skills, or I'm missing some of these technical skills, and really being honest of what do I enjoy doing. A lot of times it's sometimes I'm good at it, but I don't really enjoy it. Find team members, find people who are actually kind of, sometimes even if they're the opposite technically, may be really beneficial. Just make sure, again, all of those other components are really in place. Diverse teams do work well. But again, you have to be really honest in what skills are you providing. We can't do it all. We obviously rely heavily on our teams. And so some of the best team members honestly come from unexpected places and bring unexpected skills. So don't be quick to discount some of them, even if they don't fit your perfect profile that you may have had in your mind initially. And lastly, you as the CEO, you're leading. You are the leader in what you're building. You set that mark, you set that guideline. And as an example, trust goes both ways. Treat your team as an asset. They really will pull through. That goes both ways. You treat your team as the asset that they are, they will treat you the same way. And of course, trust is a two-way street. Trust that your team can build what you envision, and that they can bring it to fruition, and they will. That's absolutely critical to know that you are able to actually delegate, because that's another thing. Not as a founder, co-founder, you're going to have your plate completely full. Be ready to delegate and trust that they are going to be able to actually pull through and be able to actually complete those tasks that you give them. So that's just a really brief overview. Happy to add any additional details. Of course, always open for office hours. Again, this is more on the soft skills, and of course, as a technical founder, sometimes we look at, you know, everything on paper looks great and we think that we have it all, and not realizing that there's a whole nother set of kind of skills that are brought to the table with each person that we bring on board.
Thanks, Monica. We have, I think, just one question. If there are more question founders, you can put that here, or I can open the breakout room. But the question is, can you share a great general conversation formula for handling difficult topics or giving feedback between co-founders? A difficult topic could mean anything from why did he blow this deal to this shouldn't have, like, this person really shouldn't have said that in the investor meeting.
I actually have a set of questions. So I actually have a cheat sheet for that I can share of hard questions to ask, because a lot of these, it's how the person thinks and how they go about solving some of these issues. So a lot of the difficult topics, it's really dependent on how you handle those, how you go go about addressing them. and whether that aligns with what your co-founder does as well. If there is a severe deviation from how you guys think, that is a severe red flag. You want some complementary skills, but you want to be at least on the same page. And again, like I said, there's a series of questions that I have that I now ask myself and co-founders before we even start anything. And I'm happy to share those. That goes through anything from like life events to actual technical examples of challenges.
Anyone else has any other thoughts?
Yeah, I can chime in as well. I think like adding a cadence, to doing autopsies on bad scenarios, right? And like feedback sessions is kind of helpful, right? One team I was on, we did retros at the end of the week, and we would kind of look back at why did we blow this deal, like for the example that they're giving, and just kind of have a routine of being comfortable with feedback, right? And being vulnerable and leading with feedback, potentially on things that you could have changed to produce a different outcome is helpful.
The biggest disagreements that we see legally in the very beginning has to do with co-founders and leaving, even 3 years in. So just like you should have like a phase of dating, you should also have like an upfront, maybe exit type clause that they agree to, that might have severe penalties, right? So like here's the thing, like you can't have a co-founder that has 10 to 15% on the cap table and not doing anything. That's not going to work for VC investment. So, it's one thing if you already have the VC investment and they leave and the company's going along well, or maybe not well, but that first round is really important.
All right, I think that's it for questions. So I'm going to open up breakout rooms. Today we are doing things differently. You'll see all the mentors' names and all of our names. So you just keep hopping around different rooms, founders, to get feedback from as many mentors as possible today. So, and mentors, if you could go and join the room with your name, and then founders can come in.
And Sneha, are we doing a hot seat and rating the founders in these sessions, or it's just like general feedback and Q&A?
General feedback. They should have questions around team, and they should be prepared with like what does their team look like, and then general question and feedback.
Awesome, thanks.
There's a lot of rooms for you guys to go to, so you can't get lost.